And thanks a lot to the Iran Media Program and Center for Global Communication Studies and Briar Smith for inviting me and for having me here today. As Briar said, this research I'm going to present actually originated in an Iran Media workshop in 2009, and I would also like to thank Maran Kredi, who invited me 2 years ago to this particular workshop. So my lecture is called Digital Heroes, Video Games and Identity Construction in Iran, and it analyzes contemporary Iranian video games and explores the ways in which these games communicate different concepts of identity to their audiences. It's based on content analysis of more than 20 video games developed in Iran between 2007 and 2011, and on interviews with 7 major Iranian game producers. All these interviews were conducted in Tehran in 2008, in November 2008, although most of them has been amended by extensive email communication later on. And if you allow me, I would like to start my presentation with a short personal story. I was born in 1978, meaning I grew up in the 80s. And I would say I belong to the first video game generation. We are like the first generation for which video games were really an important part of our childhood, an important part of our teenage. And because computers were not kind of common in the 80s, especially in Czechoslovakia, only few of us had computers, and we used to gather together and play the games together. So games were essentially a really important part of our socializing. It was like playing games was essentially a social activity. We used to gather like 5 or 6, usually boys, together, and we used to play. At the same time, because I was born in the communist Czechoslovakia, almost all the games we used to play have been designed and developed either in the US or in Western Europe. There was almost no domestic production. Most of the games we played were copied Western games. And I particularly remember one game, which in fact is kind of a link to the issues of politics, representation, and identity. In particular, I remember one game we used to play, and it's this game called NATO Commander. It's actually a real-time strategy game designed by the US company Microprose in 1984. And it's a great game. It was a real-time strategy game. It was a great game, like really challenging and really well designed. And in this game, you are sworn in as a new NATO commander, and your task is to attack and defeat the Warsaw Pact forces in Europe. The game looked like this. I mean, it's not something you would call a video game today, but believe me, the game has amazing mechanics, really well developed. So it's my so thanks to the Microprose. And the game was based on real geography, and the unit deployment was based on the information available. Meaning, what you see is a map of Europe, you see the NATO forces, you see the Warsaw Pact forces, and if you actually look at the geography, at like the Iron Curtain, in the initial stage of the game, of most missions, your task is to attack and destroy Prague, in the very initial phase of the game. And I'm from Prague. I grew up in Prague, and I was playing this game, I was like 10, 11, 12, and till today, I kind of remember the strange feeling I had, like, we wanted to finish the game, we want to like really win the game. At the same time, there was something uneasy about us being the bad guys, the evil you have to defeat. And I would say this game actually shares a lot of common traits with the contemporary European or American video game production, particularly when related to the Middle East, meaning it offers you oftentimes a heavily schematized simulation of reality, which kind of schematizes very complex real-world conflicts into a simple bipolar frame, into a conflict between us and them, and kind of obviates any further explanations and deeper context of the conflicts. So let's return to video game analysis. Before we start with the video game analysis, we have to shed light on one substantial feature of video games, meaning video games are interactive media. And unlike film or other audiovisual media, any content analysis dealing with video games have to cover 3 separated yet intertwined layers. However you frame them or however you label them, they have to cover the audiovisual layer, the audiovisual signifiers, the narrative, meaning the narrative structure, and then something we could call gameplay or the rule system, which essentially is your experience from playing the game, your personal experience from playing the game. And this gameplay stems from the rule system governing the player's interaction with the game. I would argue that on all three levels, political, ideological, religious, or cultural messages can be communicated to the players. And I would argue that particularly the level of rule system, the hidden system of rules, which fundamentally shapes the decisions you can make in the game, and basically shapes what outcomes these decisions will have, is particularly important for analysis and for studying games. There are many methodological approaches you can take towards studying the rule system. We usually use deterministic finite state machine analysis or Petrinet. So you can these are just tools. You can really choose them whatever fits your aims. What you see here, it's a Petrinet model of gameplay of one Arab game called Quraysh, and essentially it's like simply visual representation of the rule system, visual representation of the choices you can make in the game and their possible outcomes. This procedural logic, or this kind of this emphasis on the rule system, led video game theoretician Jan Bogos to argue that video games open a new domain of persuasion thanks to their core representational mode, procedurality. I call this new form procedural rhetoric, the art of persuasion through rule-based representations and interactions, rather than the spoken word, writing, images, or moving pictures. So, to give a particular example, what I mean by procedural rhetoric or by persuasive games, I will show you two prominent persuasive games, which in fact have close link to contemporary game production in Iran. And these two games are America's Army, developed in 2002, and Al-Quwa Al-Khasa, Special Force, developed in 2003. The former is a PR and recruitment tool of the US Army, whereas the latter is a promotional game developed by the Lebanese Hezbollah movement. Both games are consciously conceived as persuasive, and both utilize the procedural rhetoric of the first-person shooter genre in order to deliver a message. So they kind of use the same procedural logic or the same mechanics to the very same end, although of course in a very similar way, although to very different ends. So whereas the former stresses courage, professionalism, and high moral profile of US soldiers, the latter emphasize resistance, martyrdom, and obligation to a higher spiritual whole. There's actually another game conceived in close cooperation with the US.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yep.
Does it have the same purpose of recruiting?
Yeah. I would say the most both games are actually primarily PR and promotional tool. So they are like the primary I would say primary aim is to kind of create a public or help to create or shape public image of America's Army and of Hezbollah. So this game is primarily targeting the internal Lebanese public. As for recruiting, it's hard to tell. Like this, America's Army directly has a link to recruitment centers. Al-Quwa Al-Khasa, they it's promoted as it could serve recruitment, but I would doubt what's really the impact of that. It's really far more kind of shaping the popular image. It's really I would say communicating the message to the audience on a new level is its primary purpose. Yeah. And there's another game I would like to show you, because it's actually a game which again has a strong link to the game production in Iran today, and it's a game Assault on Iran, which has been developed by the US New York-based company Kumawar in 2005. It's actually Kumawar is a company they particularly during the war on terror, they developed every single month. It's a company which developed new game, mostly based on the real missions from Iraq or Afghanistan. So, and what they were kind of presenting was that they were doing news gaming, meaning instead of reading or watching the news, you can play them with our games. So we can give you kind of deeper insight into into what's really happening there. There's been a lot of debate and of course analysis on the ideological level and on the ideological bent of these games. Nevertheless, this game is particularly important for us because it's the first game in the series which is fictitious. It's the first game which is not based on some real campaigns. It's the first game which is based on further potential engagement of the US Army. It features Iranian soldiers as enemies and unfolds a story in which US Special Commando is sent to Iran to terminate its nuclear program. I'll actually show you the trailer to this game before we'll continue. Okay. This game triggered some harsh criticism and started a debate on the Iranian side, not only in Iran, but also among Iranians in diaspora, particularly in the United States. Beyond analyzing the ideological schematizations and persuasive messages included in this game, like diplomacy has failed, Iran is developing weapon of mass destruction, there is no other way than to, etc., which is kind of I would say, sort of obvious, and it's not part of my lecture. This game, in particular, is important for us because this game most arguably helped to the establishment of the National Institute for Computer Games, which has been established in Tehran in 2006. And I would say, particularly, not the game, but the public debate which this game opened has been the kind of vehicle which served to kind of persuading the government that it's worth, putting money into video game development and video game control, or video game kind of production. If you're interested in more deeper analysis of the ideological implications of Kuma War, I can give you a link to many articles, including my own and Nina Hunterman and other scholars. But we'll move actually on, because here we have to make a brief detour and to introduce the game culture in Iran, the gaming culture in Iran. Video games constitute a popular leisure time activity for a substantial part of Iranian youth. And besides gaming consoles and personal computers in homes, the so-called game nets, which are essentially like cyber cafes with network computers when you can go and play particularly multiplayer action or strategy games with your friends. These game nets and the computers, of course, at homes facilitate wide access to the global video game production. Here has to be emphasized that first, because Iran is not a signatory of the international copyright treaties, and second, because of the US embargo prohibits many software companies doing legitimate business in Iran. You oftentimes can't buy original games in Iran, or actually what you can buy are simply copied games. So if you go to any shop in Tehran, particularly not in Tehran or in any major cities, you can simply buy for $2 to $5 any single US game which has been produced just soon after the game has been released in the US, sometimes even a week earlier. Meaning sometimes you can actually buy a game in Iran a week before it has been released in the US, and oftentimes it could be cracked and with Farsi subtitles. Meaning if you are growing up as a teenager in Tehran, you have access to the complete US game production. Actually, sometimes easier than a US teenager if he doesn't want to steal it from BitTorrent, etc. Because you can just go to a shop and buy whatever or copy whatever you want. Meaning, of course, the gamers here, they play European and US games, and they very critically evaluate them according to the quality, gameplay, etc., and they are really knowledgeable about the whole whole production which exists here. Until recently, yep, no problem.
So are they pirated, or are they legitimate copies that have been...
No, they're pirated. Okay. They're pirated. Man, the same actually the same goes in many countries in the region, with some exceptions. In Damascus, I was able to buy whatever even before it was released. Yeah.
Well, how did you get 1 week earlier, like you said?
Sorry, because they leak because of leaks. the game is of course ready. For example, 1 month before release, it's ready, and it's just this PR campaign is like prepared for, and sometimes it leaks. There are like hacker groups and like groups of like crackers who actually kind of compete who can get the source code even before it's released, and it's like source of pride to crack it and to put it on market before the official release. But yeah, this is not like even after, like you can just buy it. Until recently, the games of European, American, and to lesser extent Japanese origin have almost exclusively dominated the Iranian market. Until recently. Unsurprisingly, the Iranian authorities are concerned about the negative influence of Western games on Iranian youth. Some games have been even banned, usually for explicit display of sexuality and violence, like for example Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Some video games have been criticized for misrepresenting Islam, like for example Call of Duty. And alongside kind of censorship and establishment of some system of rating games, whether they are appropriate or not, it's important to say that before the authorities now strive to provide young audience with domestic production. So in 2006, the government established the National Institute of Computer Games in Tehran. And as I said, this institute does two things. First, like it kind of subsidized game development of games which are conceived in accordance with Iranian and Islamic values. Second, of course, it kind of tries to boost the development of IT industry, and at the same time, it deals with other governmental institutes in creating the system of rating games. Because before 2005, there's been no rating system in Iran, meaning like the games you can buy on the streets were completely unregulated. Yeah? And in some cases, like broadly, which is not the case even in the US, you have like very kind of strong regulatory body labeling the games according to how much violence and sex they contain. So there has been a specific system devised in Iran, which is basically doing the same, including kind of the Islamic element, but mostly it's violence and sexuality. That's the National Foundation, or National Institute of Computer Games. That's its English website. And if you actually look at the statement of the institute, for me it's kind of fascinating, because it's saying video and computer games have an important and particular role by their influences in creating culture, form, and improving cultural and scientific personality, education, supplementary role-playing, and also filling parts of society's different age grouping leisure time. Based on the aforementioned importance, a great attention to programming for producing new cultural products like the proper computer games, and a special attention to the allies for knowing and posing them for the sake of a better use from this excellent group are really significant. And the Article 2 of the association says the indication, improvement, and promotion of cultural basis and Iranian Islamic identity by this industry with a special attention to the children and adolescent. I would say here's one really important thing for me, or interesting thing for me, is how extremely positive this statement is on the let's say impact of video games, or on the transformative aspect or the transformative power of video games. It's like telling you that video games, how important role they play in forming, etc., etc. Which I would say it's like kind of a really not well researched area. And for example, for me in the Czech Republic, if I'm now like working on we are developing together with the Academy of Science and Charles University, we are developing an educational game, and it was kind of hard to persuade the authorities that games, matter, that the games could have positive or even negative impact. It was far from easy. So I would say this definitely kind of reflects the thing that by most, I would say, people in the power to decide, or those who are dealing with the game industry, games are simply not perceived as neutral containers. Because most of the Western games, they do not see just as kind of mainstream entertainment, but they kind of recognize the ideological and representational layer of politics in these games, particularly when related to Middle East and Iran or Islam. So I would say that kind of helped to perceive games as really important medium, which simply matters. Also, what is important in the establishment of this institute is that the Islamic Iranian Republic after revolution has defined itself predominantly in cultural sense. There is very strong emphasis on culture production and on like creating like authentic Islamic culture production, which seems as opposition to like the former like kind of deprived, culture, which has been, or culture production, which has been produced under the Shah's regime, and which has been seen as kind of like accepting or being influenced a lot by the depravity of the West or the Western culture. So this is like really important, I would say, this kind of like emphasis on culture production, on the transformative power of this media. So let's see what is the first video game actually produced within this particular framework is the game called Amaliyat-e Vije, Special Operation, which has been produced in 2007 by the Iranian Student Union. And this game is a direct answer, I would say, is a direct answer to the assault on Iran, to the US game. It's a first-person shooter game, and it narrates a fictitious story of an Iranian nuclear scientist who was kidnapped by American security forces in Iraq while visiting the tomb of Imam Hussein. And the player represents a special forces commander, Bahman Nasseri, who is appointed to rescue the scientist. So you got exactly the same framework. In the US game, you have to go to Iran to terminate this nuclear program, and you are a special commando leader. In this game, you're a special commando leader who goes to Iraq to rescue nuclear scientists who has been unjustly kidnapped by the American forces. According to the author of the game, Muhammad Taqi Fakhrian, quote, "The game is based on cultural and religious principles. It encourages the culture of martyrdom and defense of the rights." End of quote. And I would say this really important element, which we'll see recurring again and again, the emphasis on defense, the emphasis on defense of the rights, the concept of difa. The Iranian Culture Institute, Tebyan, which is subsidized by the Iranian government through the Sazname Tablighat Islami, the Islamic propaganda organization, in 2008 actually produced another game, another action game, which is called Muqawamat, Resistance. And this game is set in the year 2015, which then was like kind of distant future. Now it's not that much, but still. It was 2008, 2015. And the player controls Lebanese Hezbollah commandos sent to Israel to seek and destroy a secret military program focused on the development of an unknown weapon of mass destruction. The game utilizes a classic first-person shooter framework with Israeli soldiers as enemies. Again, I would say Resistance is a clear response to US military games. If you actually look at the booklet of Resistance, and if you translate it, it says, "Computer games play a key role in forming public opinion. They can be used for positive or destructive means. The latter represent games preparing public for military campaigns, such as attacks on Iraq or Afghanistan, which misrepresent Muslim forces. Authors of these games misuse their monopoly for developing and publishing games. Therefore, we aim to develop games in accordance with Islamic and Iranian values, period." Games like Resistance or the previous shown Amaliyat-e Vije utilize the procedural rhetoric of first-person shooter games for expressing a political stance and directly participate in the, let's say, ideological struggle with the United States and Israel. Nevertheless, the video game production in Iran is largely multifaceted, and you can find today, I would say, hundreds of games with really different concepts of identity and with really different aims and backgrounds. So let's continue. There are more games produced by the Governmental Tebyan Institute. There is actually a kind of long series of games called Nabarde-Hai Manadegar, which can be translated as the memorable battles. And actually, those games are different. These games are aimed to foster national pride. For example, this game, Val Fajr Hasht, which is based on the real operation Dawn 8 from the Iran-Iraq war, in which the Iranian forces, the Pasdarans, captured the Fao Peninsula in 1986. Or you can even find games like Najat-e-Bandar, Saving Harbor, which retells a story of defending the port Bandar-e Pahlavi, which is today known as Bandar-e Enzeli, against the Soviet invasion in 1941. And all these games are based on like kind of famous or memorable battles from the Iranian history, let's say contemporary modern Iranian history. And in all these games, inevitably, you defend Iran against outer aggression, which goes like well with the like kind of concept of defense, particularly when talking about the Difa al-Muqaddas, the defense in the Iran-Iraq war, which is a really strong concept in contemporary Iranian culture.
And cinema too.
Cinema, and in daily life, it's still like really the horrors of war are still pretty much present in the culture and are used by the, of course, governmental like kind of media policy. So, and finally, in the, let's say, kind of governmental production, you can find games which are completely different, like Islamic Sims, which is still currently in development, which promote Islamic and family values and are particularly targeting, or should be targeting girls. These games openly appropriate Western successful games and just recast their frameworks in Islamic fashion. This is actually not the Islamic Sims. I was not able to get pictures, so this like illustrative screenshot, courtesy to some. It is a mod to real Sims, but actually the game I saw looked kind of similar, but I just was not able to get the screenshot. So now we have to make a brief stop and kind of talk about how the mechanism of productions work in Iran. The mechanism of official game production works like that. There is some some institute loosely or directly affiliated with the government, which produces a script or a concept. And oftentimes, this script or concept is then contracted to private or individual software houses or game studios, which then oftentimes develop the game relatively independently. Either using game engines, like game engine is the core element of video game. It's simply like the piece of program upon which you can build a game, and by modifying it, you can use the one game engine for several games which use similar mechanics. Oftentimes they use game engines which are freely available online, like Torque. Sometimes they develop the game engines on their own, and oftentimes actually the software houses or the companies, beyond developing games resulting from these governmental contracts, they, for example, use the same engine or a different engine, and they develop games on their own, which can differ significantly from the governmental production in its concept and in its aims. When I was actually doing interviews with some of these companies, even like developing games like Muqawamat, there was really different interviews I got from the people writing the script and people actually doing the programming. And the people doing the programming were simply, many of them were programmers who worked in many companies and done more games, and they didn't care not that much or at all about the kind of content of the game. They were really geeks who really kind of were really proud that they can design an engine which works and which is like technologically kind of challenging or comparable to Western production, and they really want to make a game and publish it using their engine. There was like strong kind of pride in their work, and oftentimes, for example, we spend like hours like seeing the physical models, like how bullets are reflecting, or if you shoot a bullet, how it's like leaves a trace on a wall. And when I was trying to talk, what about the content, what about the storyline? We don't care, it's them who design the story. It's not our business. We are programmers. Look what we just created, like how actually kind of challenging it was. So oftentimes, I would say they design games on their own, and the first actually independent games which resulted from the kind of purely personal motivations of the designers was actually even before the National Institute was established, and it's a game from 2005, which I would argue is the first Persian video game ever, or like dealing with Iran. It's called this one is called Payan-e Masumiyat, The End of Innocence, and has been developed by Puya Arts software in 2005. The primary designer is Puya Radgar, and I will actually show you the trailer of this game before going further. Sorry for the low quality, as the only one is English subtitles. And yeah, it's actually
بالاخره نوبت هر کسی میشه که تو زندگیش جنگو ببینه. هر چی که طی سالها ساخته شده توی یه لحظه خراب میشه. دوستایی رو که سالها میشناختی توی یه لحظه از دست میدی. بلاهایی سرت میاد که تا 5 دقیقه پیشم فکرشو نمیکردی.
حالا چی کار کنیم؟
Okay, basically I would say that Quest of Persia series, it's a series, now they develop more and more games. This was the first game in a series. These are games which clearly stem from the needs of the authors to articulate their Iranian identity through the media, which they saw relevant to their generation. Quest of Persia series covers different periods of Iranian history, ranging from Qajar times to the Iran-Iraq war. Actually, what you saw, this game, the framework of the game is, I would say, kind of also loosely inspired by other concepts. But I would say instead of like these U.S. military games, the main hero, the Arashk, is something like the Iranian Indiana Jones. He's an archaeologist. He's like doing his research on the sites in the desert, and then actually they are being attacked because it's during the Iraq-Iran war. They are being attacked by Iraqi forces, but the Iraqis in the game have, I would say, the same kind of role as, for example, the Nazi or communist or Russian soldiers play in the Indiana Jones movie. They are just those who are going after the artifacts and he's preserving them, etc., etc. There is very strong female character, Layla. Can be loosely inspired by, for example, Lara Croft, which is another famous archaeologist in the game industry. And essentially, they through escaping from the Iraqi forces, they kind of find some gate, and then the games actually in the series you actually go from time to time. So each game in the series covers a different period, and now they are becoming more and more technologically and conceptually developed. If you compare them with the governmental production from the same time, this game is by far better, by far like technologically and conceptually better. In fact, this game stems from Puya Radgar. Actually, he studied in Boston, Puya Radgar, and he told me that he was disturbed by the way Iran was perceived among his US colleagues. That's actually what he said. The way they were thinking about Iran was a place of desert and camels. They thought that there is no technology there, no history and civilization. That kind of bothered me, because that was the view of most people in the US and Western countries. So I was thinking, if we could have a game that would show the nature of our country, our history and civilization, that would help people understand about Iran. And when we're actually talking about their production, this game, Quest of Persia, it's a clear response to one particular US game. But it's not this kind of the games they were talking. And most actually the independent producers, most of them mentioned one particular game, which kind of was among various motivations why to produce Persian games and why to produce authentic Persian games with authentic details and dealing with history, dealing with culture, and dealing with, for example, mythology. And this game was not a first-person shooter and was not dealing with politics or religion at all. It was the game Quest of Persia. Prince of Persia, sorry, Prince of Persia. It's actually, anyone play this game? Anyone of you? Young generation? No, it's 1989. It's not that old. Okay, it's Prince of Persia. It's actually a game produced by the U.S. company Software Brotherhood in 1989, and it was a milestone in its genre. It's action adventure. It was the first game which had brilliant animations, appealing gameplay, and now it's a cult game. Nevertheless, in the game actually you play. The plot of the game is kind of clear. There is this princess, this female character, which has been kidnapped by evil vizier, and you are playing the hero, the prince, whose task is to go through dungeon, finally assassinate and kill the vizier, and rescue and of course marry the female character, the princess. This game is a great example of what I call digital Orientalism. This is the actual box of the game. You got like harems and bazaars and dungeons. You got like scimitars and turbans, and you got like this scantily kind of like robed girl and this kind of evil vizier, etc., etc. The thing is that this game, like beyond like kind of schematizing this sort of Persia as a place from 1001 Night, kind of like exotic and ahistorical place. The important thing is that the visual imagery has almost nothing to do with the real historical image of Persia or of Iran. It's far more kind of based on this like agglomerate of Indian/Arab themes. if you look at the background, it's like Mughal India. If you look at at the sheikh, it could be some Bedouin Arab sheikh, etc. It's like this kind of like assemblage of various emblematic symbols associated, again, as I said, with 1001 Night. And from this kind of assemblage, you create the exotic Persia. And that was something which bothered all of the producers, I talked with. That was something which really bothered them, saying like, in this game, we are represented as Arabs or as Indians, which is not, there's nothing to do with the real Iranian history. And that's actually the reason many of them started to produce their games. And what most of them stressed, which is really amazing, most of them stressed, for example, like Puradgar, quote, Quest of Persia is 100% Persian, from music to environments up to characters, end of quote. And this is something really amazing for me, which I haven't seen anywhere else in game development, that you stress that your game is 100% authentic, because be it like Persian or Arab or whatever, and it's clearly it's a response to this kind of gross misrepresentation or global misrepresentation of your culture, which you perceive as being misrepresented. Another independent game is Age of Pahlevans, Asr-e Pahlevan, which has been recently published by the company Rezana Afzal Sharif. The game is based on ancient Iranian mythology and, in a typical fantasy genre manner, retells a story of a hero who struggles to save his city against the forces of doom. Yet again, the question of specific Iranian identity of the hero is important to the authors. It is emphasized by the game's background, story, locations, and textures. Moreover, Bahram Borghei, the author of the script, told me that in foreign games like Grand Theft Auto, you can play a hero who kills people and steals cars. In Asr-e Pahlevan, the hero is Pahlevan, which means not only he is a hero, but he follows a moral code. And actually, the concept of Pahlevan runs deep into the Iranian culture. It's like the best translation would be, the literal translation is warrior, Pahlevan, but I would say better translation like champion or knight. It's basically it could be a warrior, but could be, for example, an athlete or some kind of like someone who is famous not only for his or her achievements, but also for some kind of fair play and moral code. So it's a concept which combines some kind of struggle and achievement with or fight with morality, with some moral values. And here, actually, there is a strong emphasis on the high moral profile of the hero, meaning on the virtual representation of the player self in most of the independent games in Iran I've seen. And of course, there are many explanations. It could be a result of the genuine motivations of the authors who are really perceive, the mainstream US or European games unnecessarily violent and over-sexualized, which is in many cases true. Nevertheless, also, it could be very simply pragmatic step resulting from the necessity to ensure that the game will get the approval of the Wezarate-e-Irshad, of the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance. Because today all the games actually in one way or another have to be approved by some kind of system of governmental bodies in order to be able to be sold on Iranian markets. And of course, violence and sexuality are the things which are being watched. Which actually now leads us, the issue of approval now leads us back to the question of financing. I would say even though these games are developed relatively independently, they do not result from any governmental contract, and the script and the work is done completely independently by the producers. Oftentimes, if they want to survive on the harsh market, which is the Iranian video game market, where they are competing with copied Western video games, meaning you can buy the Western video game for $2 to $5. These Persian games, most of them you can buy for the equivalent of, let's say, $7. Meaning the players are willing to pay slightly more for a Persian game, but that's it. For $7, you can't really survive unless you either make it to international markets and get revenue from there, or get some at least partially get the production costs covered by either some governmental grant or some other kind of institutional help. So oftentimes they strive to, for example, develop the game on their own and then present it to the Ministry of Culture, which can oftentimes actually support it or buy it in form, for example, as a kind of for promotion reasons, because many of these games are actually based on cultural and and historical events. Sometimes actually the companies, for example, develop the engine, the game engine, I mean the core engine, they develop this one and can get technological grant from the ministry from different ministry. And this grant, this game engine is then for example, given for free to other Persian companies, you know, so it's like, and they got at least part of the development cost covered. Or for example, in case of one game, the authors went to the city of Bam, and they've taken photographs of the architecture, the portals, the streets, just 3 months before the earthquake. And then in their game, they virtually recreated the city of Bam. And they got so many data that they actually got a grant from the Ministry of Culture for like digital preservation of cultural heritage. Because what they did was like a model of BAM, which now can be used for education in museums, etc., etc. And of course, it helped them to, you know, had some money for the game development, which of course used the city of BAM as a kind of background. So that actually, this is actually the case of. I would say probably the most technologically ambitious game, which is called Garj and has been produced in 2009, which is a game based on the novel of Garj written by Asadi Tusi. Is based on the Iranian pre-Islamic mythology, and I will actually show you one more trailer. Is the end like 1:30, including discussion, or yeah? So that's fine. So let's see the Garj trailer. Very long trailer. Nevertheless, it's essentially, if you look at the game, it's essentially standard action role-playing game, which is kind of appropriating pattern we know from many games, you know, like Gods of War. But when you actually talk with if you look at the booklet or what the authors say about the game, I find this really amazing in the realm of digital entertainment. They say the treasure trove of Persian mythology contains within it some of humanity's oldest and most profound myths. They recount a rich and ancient culture, meaningful literature, and exciting legends that bring to life the excitement of Iranian civilization in all its glory, an experience often lost in the daily travails of modern life. This video game, Garj is a symbolic recreation of the spirituality, grandeur, and mythical atmosphere of ancient Persia, derived from the epic poem Garjatname, written by Asadi Tusi. Most of the images and scenes depicted in this game are drawn from or based directly upon historical resources and ancient stone carvings found throughout Iran, and a chain of thought that goes back thousands of years to the dawn of Western and Eastern civilizations alike. And I really love this statement because it kind of encapsulates what I was trying to say, that there is a deep, I would say, motivation, personal motivation, or vision on the side of the Iranian video game producers, and they really they perceive video games as a medium capable of, you know, dealing with any like cultural, with really serious cultural and let's say even like ethical issues, and which I would say they definitely are, but I would argue that you know, which and how, but. So there is like really this kind of this real like motivation to create your own representation and to kind of communicate, the richness and history of your own culture, of your own, of what you feel part of your culture to the outer world. So it's like the essential like kind of vehicle. In this sense, for them, the Garjharp game serves as a vehicle for like cultural dialogue, communicating, and especially cultural dialogue with the West, which is like kind of really trying to kind of be part of this global, meaning Western actually, gaming community. So it's perhaps even like I got one more video which I would like to show you, but I will actually maybe leave this video after questions, because now I would like to kind of wrap it up and kind of summarize the findings, and then we have questions, and if there is interest, I can show you the latest video from the latest video game, which is just has been developed and is brilliant and really kind of shows what I was talking about. So I would say essentially, whereas the Iranian government perceives games as a new semiotic language of the youth and therefore utilizes them to promote Islamic values and foster national pride, many independent or semi-independent producers maneuver within the and around state's interest, presenting instead their own, oftentimes quite different concepts of identity. So paradoxically, the establishment of the National Institute of Computer Games and the support it provides resulted both in production of games directly asserting the official concept of Iranian Muslim identity, as well as games whose particular elements challenge this identity or even have to be removed by the Wazarate-in-Shar through the approval process. Like sometimes, there have been references, for example, to Zoroastrianism in few games. These has to be removed. There has been in some games like concept of magic, which has to be removed and changed to something different, etc., etc. Therefore, contemporary Iranian games encompass a broad variety of topics, ranging from the Islamic Revolution through popular soap operas to ancient Iranian mythology. The resulting concepts of identity are achieved through sensitive negotiations between the demands, funding, and restrictions of the state and the visions and engagement of private entrepreneurs. Nevertheless, that's what I would like to argue, despite varying ideological background, independent or let's say semi-independent and state-funded producers both share a common belief that that Iran and Iranian culture is misrepresented by global video game production, and they strive to present unique Iranian heroes to their audiences. The preliminary sales figures of Quest of Persia actually suggest that there is a potential demand for games with Iranian heroes and Iranian stories. As Pujar put it, quote, "People bought this game in huge numbers because it's an Iranian game with an Iranian hero." And of course, he even told me that actually the game has been bought in places they even thought there are no computers there, that this game has been really like kind of, in 2005, it was kind of like really successful. And finally, final point, utilizing games for delivering message to the young audience opens a new domain of persuasion, the domain of procedural rhetoric. I would say that the Iranian authorities are apparently aware that their message, in order to be heard, has to be recast in accordance with the new media and cultural ecology. Yet, actually, when we examine the games produced so far by Tebyan or the other, let's say, government institutes, I would actually argue that they kind of fail in utilizing the full potential of the media, in like utilizing the full procedural rhetoric of the media. They mostly pale in comparison with the Western production, and their gameplay is mostly unappealing. So most actually the games, the games, about attacking Israel or defending Iran from the Soviet invasion. I mean, they are kind of old, but they are really kind of they use really like simple game mechanics, and they are not fun to play. It's like kind of, and the fact is that they're actually hard to find in video game shops. When I was in Tehran, I like kind of hard time finding these games, and most of them I bought in the Basiji shops or in like this kind of like media propaganda shops. But when I went to the video game market, it was some people even told me, no, there are no like games like that if you had never heard of them. Yeah. Okay. So on the other hand, the games produced by what I call independent or semi-independent game producers are mostly comparable with similar Western production. By comparable, I mean, of course, they are, for example, like 3 to 4 years behind the contemporary production, which is amazing, given the limited resources and restrictions, and predominantly financial limited resources. These producers have the job they've done on Gage Harp or Quest of Persia is simply amazing. Like mostly a small team, 3 to 5 people, and they really develop the game on their own. Where similar like process like that, for example, in the US or even in Czech Republic now, would take a team of 20 people and much larger budget. So there's this really strong passion and strong personal motivation. Most of these games have been done in the beginning not as a business, but I think I got a quote here. That's what R. Jeffrey told me, the author of Gage Harp, and it brilliantly like sums. It was more passion and personal interest than business. The greatest challenge was that you hoped that the Iranian youngsters and teenagers would buy this, because it is something different from the other games. It is a fascinating, unique story. We try to bring Iranian values into the game, not just the violence that you can see in Western games. The important thing is the personal interest. That in the beginning it was not even like profitable business. Oftentimes they actually invested their own money. For example, they've met like programming websites or doing some business software for companies, and this was like really like strong kind of personal motivation. But I would say they are mostly comparable, and actually some of them can be now are being sold on Western markets, for example through Steam, and they are doing like relatively well. So we'll see what the next, they are doing well enough to enable the producers to produce, for example, a sequel, which is okay. No like big money, but they have money to continue to go on. And what is really important when you examine the gameplay of these games, the game mechanics, most of these in like what I call independent games, they actually consciously utilize frameworks established by Western games of similar genre. And that's really interesting. So, for example, the Asr Pahlevan clearly appropriates the pattern of Oblivion, whereas Gage Harp uses the pattern of Gods of War, or to some extent, for example, Diablo. And I would say this is actually deliberate. So I would like to conclude that on a symbolical level, these games are clearly Iranian, with Iranian heroes and mythology. Yet on what I call a structural level, they are global, more accurately Western, because what we call today global video game culture is essentially Western video game culture. You could like Japanese and Korean, but that's really kind of aside. Which I would fact clearly corresponds with the aims of the developers, meaning the independent developers, who want to express their Iranian identity and at the same time compete with Western games and reaffirm their belonging to a global cosmopolitan gaming community. So this was actually game over, so thank you for your attention, and I'm open to your questions. Please.
I'm curious, since these are sort of games that are responsive to the political situation, the geopolitical situations, that kind of intertextual conversation. And given the resource limitations that you've mentioned, which obviously they're going to get better, it's obvious enough, how does the development here in terms of the geopolitical conversation compare, let's say, to, well, not let's say, but specifically to South America or China in terms of the development of the geopolitical dimension of the games that those folks are doing?
Yeah.
You have a sense that because there's, all this kind of really active political...
Yeah, the fact is I have no data from South America at all. And limited knowledge about the Chinese game development. I know that the Chinese government is really investing a lot of money into producing, for example, multiplayer games, massive multiplayer games, which are based on Chinese mythology and Chinese culture, and it's the same twofold. One is like to kind of like promoting and like kind of like asserting the Chinese identity, but the second is like it's purely economical thing, because it's like a field which really can make a lot of money, and also you can push a lot of like IT development into the market. If you support these companies, there's a lot of like technological innovations included, which goes into. So that's what is happening in China. The only data I really have are from the Arab world, where I would say, because previously I've done research on the Arab games, where definitely very similar pattern is kind of emerging, which is like the pattern of this emphasis on identity construction and self-representation. The only difference is that in most actual Arab countries I've been to, it's not the government, but it's the independent producers who are really kind of deliberately dealing with the issue of Muslim identity and Islam. In Iran, it's the opposite. It's the government which tries to promote the Islamic identity. And all the, I would say, independent producers kind of really try to stay away from from political issues and religious issues, and they really focus on games which are based either mythology or really like ancient history, which makes sense, I mean, given the circumstances. I think you're second. I think you had a question?
Yeah, I had two actually.
Okay.
One was where are the producers, creators? I don't know if there's a distinction trained.
Yep. Yeah.
And the other question you sort of got to is how successful are the Iranian video games in other countries in the Middle East?
Yeah. Many of the independent developers have started in the US or the West. And most of the companies, most of the independent companies I've been to are located in the North Tehran, which is kind of, this era. So, but today there's actually like a lot of programmers, trained in Iran, and they are doing a great job. So, from what I've talked, when I was there in 2008, it seemed there is kind of small community of graphic designers and programmers which really know each other. And I would say now it's gradually growing bigger and bigger. And now actually, I would say there's a far more going on. There's expansion, and people are more and more companies are entering the market. But initially, they were trained in, or some of them at least have been trained in the US, for example. Also in the beginning, they oftentimes used engines available, like the either like available online or just they appropriated different engines. Even including the governmental games, sometimes they just took engine of some US game and just recast it. As for the, I have no sales data. I know that on Steam, for example, the Gajhasp got something like between average was like 5 to 6 points out of 10, which means just okay game. But again, like in comparison what they are competing with, it's, I would say, really good result. And there are people buying it on Steam now. You can buy it like for $9 from Steam, which is still kind of okay. I know they are going regularly to the for example, to the Emirates, to the expos there to present their games, and I know that there is like a kind of promotion in the region. Till today, I have no data how successful, for example, the latest Quest of Persia is on the international market. I've to just like check with them, yeah. But as I said, they've now produced like a 4th sequel, meaning definitely it's, I would say, successful enough to keep the business going. And it's definitely, when you look at it, each game is decisively technologically and conceptually better than the previous one. Yeah. Can I show the trailer later on? So there is definitely potential there. I think it's you.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that with all the various, market forces and also the ministries involved in terms of like driving or kind of constricting the various narratives that are allowed to be used in these video games. Do you think that it's verging a little bit now into like self-orientalization?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
It's not inconceivable that a Grand Theft Auto couldn't be done in Iran. It seems to be like like these contemporary topics are kind of totally left out. So it's always a reference.
No, actually, not exactly. For example, the thing is, okay, that's fair to say. I sort of left this contemporary topic out. There are games which could be shown. For example, there is a game which is kind of response to GTA, which is a game called Racer, and you play the game like in the streets of Tehran. You play a police officer who is chasing some criminal and using a car, and it's a normal racing game. There is nothing like I've omitted this one, but there are games dealing with contemporary Iran, and they are, again, the good thing is like what you mentioned. They are taking the pattern of Grand Theft Auto, like car racing and street fights, etc. But in this game, you play the policeman, so you play the ultimately like positive character, and you are chasing a criminal. And then it's the same game, just like, race the car, etc., etc. But this game is not particularly interesting in terms of identity or technological development, because it's kind of really so-so. But there are some more games dealing with contemporary Iran, and most of the games, it's you are on the good side, meaning either you are a police officer or you are, for example, investigating murder of your brother, and you are taking like you are pursuing the investigation at your own. But the thing is, I haven't finished this game yet. It's just there's a new game like like a few months ago. I got it from Iran, and I know it's based in contemporary Iran, and I'm really looking forward to playing it, but I haven't yet. So, but yeah, definitely it is. But the important thing is that you have to play positive character, yeah, which makes sense. I think it was you, then Maron, and then you again. Yeah, please.
It was a great presentation, and I noticed that the two trends that you were talking, those supported by government funding the project, and those some projects that the tech-savvy folks started. Actually, it reminded myself when I was a kid in Iran, and you bought, for example, a new fridge or something, and you get the manual. There was no Persian language in it. And actually it bothered me. Always there was like Arabic, Portuguese, all the languages. And it was something like, you always feel that you were omitted from the face of the earth.
Yep.
And in my generation, this reaction was happening because I had a whole bunch of tech-savvy friends. They decided developing algorithms for bidirectional language. Or Microsoft keyboard messes up Persian script because it mixes it up with Arabic and other characters. So they start developing these sort of things, and actually they picked up on Linux development. And if you see, most of these games are built on the free software engines, and they have lots of like Linux distributions available. I think those tech-savvy folks who are not supported by government are from those generation who wants to have this presence. Okay, we are humans, we are people, we want to have our voice. And actually technology, I don't want to say Web 2.0, but this new technological things that you can sit with a PC at your house and build up a game engine, provide this opportunity to young Iranians to have a voice in this global.
I would say absolutely, and I hope this is kind of something what I try to present, that it's really like, most of these, I would say they are of my age, the same video game generation, and I would say exactly there's this kind of like, sense of being either omitted or just extremely misrepresented, and that you want to create your own kind of voice or representation, and games are simply the medium which you perceive as really relevant for your generation or for your personally, which is something that matter. And you're right with there's a great point. All of these games are for PC, not for consoles, because PC is the platform which is the most open for open software, and you can tinker with even with the hardware, which you can't with the Xbox. I mean, you can, but it's like a different level. Tinkering with the Xbox. So it's really important that it's like using a lot of open platforms and technology which is cheaply and non-restrictively available.
And I think that's why they pick this side, that they do not pick things like muqawamat or this sort of things, because they want to stay on neutral line, to say that we are like other people, we have our own values. So that's why they make the leap back to Iranian ancient history, pre-Islamic history, or like Gashasper.
I'd say there's a lot of like happening. I would say also it could be definitely also like in many like for example Western, I would say, audience, their perception of Western audience, that the West is perceiving them primarily through the lenses of Islamic Republic, and they want like, hey, this is not just all, this is like this is not Iran or not Iran in its complexity. There is one important thing which you've actually kind of what I've done is actually lacking. Like what I've done is like I've done the content analysis of the games. I made interviews with the producers, and there's important piece which is missing, and it's like the next step of the research, which is the audience study or the reception study, which is like by far no easy thing to do, because I can talk with the producers what they think about the misrepresentation and what they wanted to insert in their game, but I have no data about how the gamers perceive, for example, the Western games or the Iranian games. I have some hints. I made like 30 interviews, but these interviews can be like used as exploratory like springboard for something. By no means I can really make some kind of evaluations, because mostly friends I've met, in northern Iran, or it's like randomly through cyber cafes and game nets. But
the hard part done.
The beginning. Well, I would really love to do the audience study, but it's extremely hard to get reliable data. And I would say the best thing would be to do it with some Iranian scholars who are interested in the same topic and simply like working from within. So I think now it was Maron.
I mean, just a general thing. I think it's very hard to distinguish between, on the one hand, kind of creating a sphere of entertainment and games and culture that's consonant with kind of a declared political ideology, but also sort of a moral sphere. Which I think a lot of countries like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, like others have been struggling with. but also think of it in terms of, for instance, the Hezbollah game. I think it'll be clearer if I start with the example. It was not aimed at the Lebanese public to the extent of shaping a perception, as opposed to aimed at young people who are within Hezbollah's sphere, who the leadership of I mean, it was sanctioned by the party, officially sanctioned, right? And even got funding.
It was.
Who are afraid of losing young followers to these other games, where people who look like Hezbollah commandos are the bad guys who are getting blown up.
Absolutely.
And so
absolutely
I think what's very interesting here, even in the Iranian game, I mean, there are lots of contemporary games. Fine, I mean, you can read pre-Islamic allegories in 2011, 2012. The guy with the big sword at the end, and so. To me, what I found fascinating is this notion of creating a sense of social mobilization around very contemporary, hot-pressing, social, political, even in this case, geopolitical. I mean, security issues, right? And making the games part of that sphere. I think that's a very, very, very interesting, because it kind of connects the social, the cultural, and the political. In a kind of entertainment that you actually participate in, as opposed to, right? So there's the playfulness, the ludic aspect of this whole thing. The involvement is so one of the things that I remember some of the Hezbollah people saying is that we consider this to be much more important than a soap opera we can produce or a documentary, because this is something that people play with over and over and over and over again. So the level of immersion, I think, could impinge on your analysis of what kind of identities are being preserved or constructed or defended with these games. Which is all stuff you've kind of said, but I'm trying to...
No, thanks a lot for that. I definitely I would like to kind of dig more into these game, like both the Arab-like games, because they are still more and more being produced. I'm not done at all. And the Iranian games, it should be a book, like in the end. It should be a book on like the Middle Eastern video game production, which is still kind of in process. But there is important thing, which you are absolutely right, because even what the people who made this Governmental, they told me, like, many people here in Iran, they think that the Hezbollah people in Lebanese are some like backward fundamentalists, like they think of them like mustache, AK-47, Taliban. We wanted to show them that they are like the professional, young, technology savvy, and that they are defending their own country and their own rights. Like it was really kind of like what they are presented as really like basically really like modern army. With like kind of this appeal. So, and I would say it goes to what you were saying. There's like kind of like this self-image, or like among the young urban population, you are trying to kind of show the different image than these kind of buried fundamentalists.
And all of this can be conceptualized as a counter-hegemonic discourse towards Western games, because in Western games we know who are the people who always get blown up. I mean, for a while it was the Soviets and all that, but they're mostly long beards, turbans, all that stuff. So all of this can be seen as a kind of a broader. Really, you have to start defining yourself against the negative definition by others, which is a kind of self-orientalization. I mean, it's a very problematic issue, because how do you get out of it?
Yeah. Well, that's
It's always in response, so it's driving.
But that's a classic definition of nationalism, is that you define yourself against the other. I mean, it's much older than,
I would say there's really something, a lot of them actually, when I brought this up in the interviews, many of them said like, no, this was just the initial kind of, for example, motivation, but definitely we don't want our games to be framed as we are doing them only as a response to the schematization that was there, but it's like we are trying to kind of bring something new into it, like transfer this kind of framework. So it's, for example, in some games they try to like provide you with a richer framework than just us and them. It really depends on how successful was that, but. I would say what is actually emerging from this, this kind of meeting of two games and two like game production spheres, is a story of hybridization and kind of like cross-cultural hybridization, because there is like this kind of amazing emphasis on authenticity. It's like, at the same time, you took like the Western platforms and you hybridize it. But it was always the case. It was always the case. Like the Middle East is essentially a place of encounters. Of encounters and hybridizations, from the very beginning. So,
especially, some of them have very Japanese aesthetics. Like I think it's very. If you look at it,
I would say it's the game which was directly. They definitely there is kind of link, as I said. I would say they know maybe Japanese game far more than, for example, we in Europe play Japanese games. I would say we got different segments, like specific segments of fans who play only Japanese games. But there is definitely, like, on the mainstream you can find some Japanese games, and there are definitely some cross kind of cultural connections. Like this game has been marketed in Japan, particularly because in Japan, if you have a interesting and non-mainstream animation, you can be really successful. Like, for example, there is like one Czech company, Amanita Design, which made this Machinarium and Botanicula, which made extreme success in Japan. And because it was successful in Japan, it actually has been featured in Wired as like this strange phenomenon, like small Czech company succeeding in Japan, and the only thing was the animation, which was completely innovative, and they tried the same thing, but I think it's your task game.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I mean,
Yeah,
I skipped some,
and
but
I just
think
want to. I didn't say it for the first time, but it was really a very engaging presentation. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
I'm going to sneak in two questions, but the first is, in terms of the games that are banned because they fail to meet the standards for appropriately Islamic stuff like that, what happens to them? Do they just fall away? Are they pirated? What happens to them?
The governmental games?
Yes.
As I said, okay, I saw them only in the BCG shops. And I had a hard time to find them in normal game shops. So, and I was actually the only one who was buying them. But it's hard to tell whether they are successful or not, as I said, because I have no data. And they're also kind of old. Some of them has been published in 2006, 2007. So even when I was there, 2008, it was kind of old.
It's about the items that like magic or things that are
like
not.
Oh, sorry, I
market
misunderstood you.
game, so
Oh, what is that? What happened? Okay, some of these elements have to be removed in the approval process. So, for example, they have to. In one game, which I will let unmentioned, they had to remove like kind of indirect references. There were some like shrines which are based on Zoroastrian shrines, and they had to kind of change it so it was not so obvious. In another game, which was a fantasy game, there was a concept of magic. It was like classical role-playing game where you can play magician, like casting fireballs, etc. They kind of have to change it that you are not wizard, you are not using magic, but you are playing some kind of like monk who has been specially trained, and you are using some mental powers. But those mental powers you acquired through training, not through magic. So essentially, it's just kind of polishing it out, but these things have to be kind of removed because they've been perceived as disturbing or as not in accordance with kind of values, Islamic values.
And when you say they're removed, then does that mean that older versions that have the bad
No,
stuff in them survive?
the game was never published. The game, because before it's published, you have to get some approval.
Like, is there a market for black market?
Yes.
Indigenous games. Not so there's a market for black market.
No,
Grand Theft Auto.
I haven't seen any like games which has been which has been deliberately produced as sort of like underground.
Right.
I haven't seen that. For example, you can have like underground music, which goes completely, beyond. No, but I would say with games, it's like kind of no. I would say maybe the thing is it's really, to make a game, it's a really costly thing. You work like 2 or 3 years on it, and it costs a lot of money. And simply you want to get it published, and you want people play it. You want people to be able to buy it. So if we can find some like underground games which are going completely beyond the whole like scheme of approval, etc., then it would be some like a short flash game or some short web-based game which you make like a political statement. But I haven't found one from Iran. There's only one, like the Cat and the Coup, but it's it's an RT game, and it's been produced by I think American-based Iranian. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like not enough. Like from Iran, I don't know really like, but I'm sure there is. I just don't know about it.
In terms of your personal anecdote at the very beginning, I think it's useful to. I mean, you're in a very situated position. Every player is, but in the game of the NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, was your personal position one of resentment and irritation? Was it one of distance humor? As I can certainly imagine it being an American player where the United States is the bad guy and so on. I mean, and I mean, lots of people must feel different things, but I'm curious as to what your reaction
actually,
was.
I kind of use it as an opening anecdote, meaning it's schematized. I'm actually schematizing myself, of course. It was far more complex. The real thing was, and it's multi-layered. First, when we played the game, it was kind of like we kind of clearly understood that the US are the good and the Russians are the bad, because we are occupied by the Russians in the time. We are occupied by the Soviet army, and we kind of clearly, as a kids, or if we are from certain circles, from certain families, depends. But most of us we kind of took it for granted. The US are the good guys and the Soviet are the bad guys because they are occupying us, and they are like it's like kind of communism is their thing. And then actually I was kind of really surprised that we are also the bad guys, like we the Czechoslovakia, that we are included in the kind of like the land of evil, the empire, the realm of evil. Why us? Like the first reaction was, why us? Like the Russians, of course, but why us? And then it was like really strange things. For example, then actually we played the game and we discovered that the game is saying like basically the Czechoslovak army is nothing you really need to think about. It's like nothing serious. But except in the city of Pilsen, there is like some kind of how do you call them? Like the parachutes, some kind of parachutes, like special forces, which are really very well trained, have like really brilliant techniques, and you have to really kind of be careful when approaching this town. And like kind of, yes, you have it. So there's a lot of layers. It's like, okay, so you see, like we are not like negligible at all. It was like 9 or 10, so it was really weird kind of all issues mixed. Also, it was a humor, but it was kind of weird, the whole thing. But it was definitely not a single feeling, and it was definitely cannot be schematized. And I did it on purpose to kind of use it as a vehicle for my presentation.
So you don't have any data then on, how it feels for Iranian players to be killing themselves?
Only the data I have are only from, as I said, limited number of interviews. Let's say 30, which are like from the statistically they are far more not representative. I can tell them most of the gamers are interviewed. Basically, they said, of course we know we are like misrepresented in the US games, but we don't care. It's the same as Hollywood. It's the same everywhere. We just play the games because they are fun and they have great graphics and great game mechanics. We just want to finish them, and we don't really care. Those people, the designers and the authorities, they care. We don't care. It's the same. It's the same in anything else. But some of them actually even told me like we don't want to play the Iranian games because they are technologically not as good as the American, so simply the American are better. But some of them told me if I play the Iranian game, for example, Clash of Persia, and I think it's technically really, like in comparison with the best US games, it's really bad. But at the same time, I really admire the creators for really creating Iranian hero, and I really like this idea. So if they make a second game which will be as technologically good as the US one, I will go for this one. So you got like really kind of multifaceted responses, and I would like to go deeper into it. I don't have anything which I can, for example, write in a paper or a chapter. It's something I can tell, but as I said, it's based on very limited sample of answers. So, okay. Yep.
Have you heard about this American games are producing now with the Persian audio? Or not?
You mean like? No.
Okay, so the audio file, I know the audio of they were in English or others, or you might use subtitles that someone produced with it. But now I've heard that these type of games that are producing here in the US are shipping with the Persian audio available.
I never heard of that, and I would really, if you come across the name of the game, or the company, I would love to have the data. The thing is, there, of course, there being like Arabic, like titles which produce in Arabic, because they can be sold, for example, in the Emirates or in Saudi Arabia. But for example, they are not sold in Egypt, or because there is no copyright protection. I really wonder the economic motivations behind it, because you can't sell the games in Iran. Like
it's not the economic motivation. It's kind of, I know it's kind of like responding to the Iranian games are produced because the games in Persian, so you do not need to get the subtitle or something, so in the game nets people can just play them or just at least have a different feeling. So they decided to produce this. I think that they are funded.
There's a game which is called Tactical Farsi, which is a game. This is like a simulator or simulation. It's an educational game produced by the U.S. Army, which is teaching the soldiers to speak Farsi. And there's Tactical Pashto and Tactical Iraqi. Those are like but those are like educational game for the army, which of course like have like they're brilliant vehicle for some like analysis of like the broader like ideological aspect. But those are tools designed by military for military. So it's nothing to do with the mainstream video game market. I think you're okay. Sorry.
Yeah. I actually have two, if that's okay. So there, two things that I picked up from your presentation. The first one is that there's definitely a range of financial kind of distinctions between the state-funded people and then the independent producers. So how do you find that influences narratives and gameplay? Do you think that there are qualitative differences between, in relation to funding? And the second one is, which is sort of a springboard to what we were talking about in terms of nationalism in particular, and what you showed us before about diplomacy failing. And I was thinking that, the idea of soft power and nation branding, and I was wondering if nation branding features into your analysis.
Yeah, thanks for two questions. Like definitely, there is a difference in narrative. But I think it's kind of clear from what I've presented that most of the games which are directly kind of conceived by some kind of governmental institute, they have they are following some kind of aims. For example, the Cultural Institute Tebian has kind of clear aims. Why are they designing games? And these aims are clearly openly stated. Like we want to kind of promote these games the authentic Islamic Iranian identity, foster national pride, and like commemorate battles, etc. So this definitely forming kind of like national Iranian Islamic identity, and you can see that the narrative basically serves as a platform for these aims, or for example, or it could sometimes they say that it serves as like spreading the Iranian culture or using the game as a showcase of Iranian culture. In the independent games are far more. The narrative is not, I would say, a vehicle. The narrative is far more the goal. Meaning the primary goal is to make a great game or to make a really good game, which has to have appealing narrative. So the narrative serves like in the same way, for example, it serves in any like fantasy game based on Tolkien or whatever. So the narrative is really kind of more developed and has a different aim. But again, also they also their own like aims and motivations, which I think I try to, which are not so or not necessarily so profoundly stated, but they kind of appear from the personal interviews, and these are to really, as you said, create your own representation in a world where you think you are either omitted or misrepresented, and kind of like express yourself through new platform, which is the interactive media. And the second question was on nation branding. Yeah, it's definitely there. But I haven't really kind of explored that. But definitely, for example, when you play the game like Najat Bandar, there is like this, you are defending Iran against the Soviet invasion, and it's this really interesting because it's happening in 1941. So it's happening, like in a historical period, which was like, and there's like many like hints that this kind of that actually, if I remember correctly, in this game, you are actually given orders from Tehran not to defend the harbor, and you as the kind of commander, you decide to defend Iranian soil, even like against the orders from the Shah, essentially, meaning that like kind of it's even like branding, the previous regime, in a way that you are actually kind of a rebellious commander who defends Iran and Iranian nation even against the kind of orders from the system. So yeah, this is really interesting to kind of go deep into these, but it would require kind of like a specific chapter only on these things. But it to be continued. I mean, this actual chapter is being published in the end of May by Ibad Tauris. It's in a book, some promo, some promo. It's called Cultural Revolution in Iran, Contemporary Popular Culture and Media, and it's edited by Annabel Srebrny and Masumeh Torfek. And after that, I definitely would like to kind of use it as a springboard for more deeper analysis of various segments of the game. So definitely, thanks for all these issues you are bringing in, because I will definitely use them in my further research.
There's interesting overlaps as well with the IRIB and like basically every other media industry in Iran in terms of like the the obsession with pedagogy, and I was talking to you a little bit of this outside, and I don't mean like the, you know, like you can't, I'm not talking about effects, I'm just talking about the obsession with being instructive, whether it's through video games or like a drama, you know, like all the narrative situations of like any indigenously produced things that show up on TV have like this moral component.
It's kind of
They're meant to be
educational.
instructive. So everything that gets past the Ministry of Culture is going to have like the same thing.
If I may, I would say there's like this amazing aspect, and I write it down, that I would say it happens with every new media, that there are two things which immediately are being kind of raised. That first, there's this fear that this media is really detrimental to sexual violence, etc., and then this medium could be the like kind of panacea for education. It was the same with television a long time ago. Now it's the same. Now, yeah, exactly. Now it's the same with video games, and I would say, as I said, like feeling the video games. You know, the research which goes on, for example, the link between violent content of a video game and aggressive behavior is far from conclusive. At the same time, the research we do between the educational content of a video game and skills and knowledge gained is far from conclusive. There are definitely things happening, but far from conclusive saying games do this to you, you know, or even educational games does this to you, and a violent game does this to you. So yeah, I can actually give you links to some research. It seems that there are things which can be proven now, but it's far from kind of this all-powerful medium which you just put some content in, then you let the kids play it, and they will magically, you know, change. Yeah. But it definitely matters. The good thing is it definitely matters in how games are treated today. They are treated both as danger and as amazing opportunity, which is like they are framed like this really medium which matters. I'm video game scholar. Of course, games matter, but not in the way not in the easy way we think. Okay, I would say what's the last question. And if there is none, I mean, I'll be available I go to Coffee with Marwan, so you are most welcome to join us if you would like to. And if you don't mind, do you want to see the trailer? Like, yeah, the trailer for the last game, which is, I would say it's fun, but yep, no. And because every video game has a bonus level, so there is a bonus level, again, a promo. If you want to know more about video games and Middle East and etc., digital media, cyberorient.net. Go for it. We actually, there's a call for papers open the end of April, which is kind of soon. The next one is next year. And let's go for the video. There's actually, it's like the last quest of Persia. And I would say it's technologically the most developed. Also really this culture and history and like in a way.
Now they turn to Safavid time.
پس از 2 حکومت صفویان بر ایران و رشد فرهنگ و تمدن ایرانی، سلطان حسین صفوی که فردی ترسو و بی‌کفایت بود، در سال 1105 هجری قمری به حکومت رسید. عزل خدمتگزاران و امرای لایق توسط او موجب تضعیف تدریجی حکومت مرکزی شد، به گونه‌ای که لشکریان افغان خود را به آسانی از قندهار به اصفهان رسانیدند.
So this is Afghan army. Government art.
بکشیدش!
Nader's played. So Nader was the commander that then defeated them at the end.
Who was the hero?
Nader.
Nader Khan.
Nader, yeah.
And who was he?
Who was the commander, one of the Safavid commanders to defeat Afghans.
Ah.
And then he became the king. He became the king. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like, again, it's a game from the Quest of Persia series, which is like, and just like really based on like rich kind of like, I would say, they're really trying to reconstruct the historical events in very accurate manner. And at the same time, as you see in the beginning, they really try to get into the game the references to the culture which existed in time, which is by far something in action, and it's an action game. That's the thing. It's an action game, and in action game, you usually don't deal with for example, visual art or fine art. You know, you don't really try to reconstruct the architecture and fine art of the era.
Architectural details were very precise. I was an architect, and it was as dumb as Fahan.
Yeah.
It's very.
Yeah, they're very proud of being really accurate. So, and that's something I don't usually find like. I would say, and it really depends. It really depends, but definitely, it's if you play Western games based dealing with Iran, you don't usually find this kind of level of authenticity. So that's like kind of, I would say, showcase what the production in Iran is kind of having towards, and I'm really kind of looking forward to play this game. So from purely gamer's perspective. So thanks a lot again, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.